On the bitterly cold streets of Manhattan, where holiday lights flickered above like stars that belonged to someone else and the scent of roasted chestnuts blended with exhaust fumes and the rush of hurried footsteps, a little girl no older than 8 sat huddled in the corner of 7th Avenue and 42nd Street, her frail body wrapped in a coat that swallowed her whole, her fingers stiff and purple, barely able to hold the paper cup she clutched with trembling hands, her wide hazel eyes scanning faces that never met hers, lips that never said her name, and hands that rarely dropped coins, and even when they did, it was without a glance, without a pause, without the slightest hint that she existed. Her name was Lila, though no one asked, a ghost child born from the cracks of a broken world, left to survive in a city that sang carols through loudspeakers while stepping over the forgotten, and all she wanted, beyond food, beyond warmth, was to see her mother again, the woman who had kissed her forehead 3 weeks ago and whispered, "Wait right here, baby, I'll be back with soup," but never returned, and though her tiny heart ached with each passing hour, Lila waited there every day, her belief in her mother unwavering, her hope the only thing she owned that hadn't been taken, and then, on Christmas Eve, with the sky weeping soft snowflakes and the world glittering in celebration, Lila's strength gave way, her knees buckled, her breath grew shallow, and the city, with all its blinking lights and bustling people, faded to black as she collapsed onto the icy concrete. The last thing she saw before the world went dark was a woman in red boots walking past without looking down, and for a moment, no one stopped. The crowd flowed around her like water around a stone, some annoyed by the obstruction, some unwilling to see what they knew would hurt, and then, cutting through the noise, a man in a navy overcoat halted mid-step, his polished shoes skidding slightly on the wet sidewalk as he turned, his sharp gray eyes locking on the small heap of tangled limbs and fallen coins at his feet. His name was Thomas Reed, a 47-year-old financial executive known in boardrooms for his ruthlessness and precision, a man whose life was measured in spreadsheets and stock projections, whose apartment overlooked Central Park but rarely saw laughter, whose heart, though not cruel, had grown numb in the absence of connection, and something about the stillness of that child on the pavement, something about the way her hand had dropped the cup as if surrendering to the silence, shattered through the detachment he wore like armor. Without thinking, he knelt, touched her face, felt the faintest pulse, and scooped her into his arms, ignoring the shouts of confused onlookers as he pushed through the holiday crowd, his briefcase abandoned in the snow, his breath short as he hailed a cab that took one look and sped off before he could open his mouth, so he ran down 42nd, weaving between cabs and red lights and swerving cars until he burst through the glass doors of St. Mary's Hospital, his overcoat soaked, his voice hoarse as he shouted, "She's not breathing," and chaos followed. Nurses surged, doctors shouted codes, machines beeped, and Lila disappeared behind sliding doors as Thomas stood frozen in the hallway, his hands shaking, his throat dry, the warmth of her weight now gone from his arms leaving an ache that surprised him with its intensity. He paced for hours under the cold fluorescent lights, watching as the ER filled with coughing strangers and crying children, his mind racing with questions he couldn't answer. Who was she? Where was her family? How had he never noticed children like her before? And then a nurse approached, young and tired, and said gently, "She's stable now, sir. Severely malnourished and dehydrated, but she's going to live," and as relief crashed through him like a tidal wave, he asked, "Does she have anyone?" And the nurse only shook her head, eyes sad. "No ID. No parents. She's not in the system. We think she's been living on the streets for a while," and something in that moment, something ancient and buried and deeply human, awoke in Thomas, and he sat by her bedside as snow fell outside and Christmas passed unnoticed. When Lila opened her eyes 2 days later, weak and disoriented, the first word she whispered was, "Mama," and Thomas, who hadn't cried since the funeral of his infant daughter Ellie 16 years ago, felt his throat tighten as he replied, "No, sweetheart. I'm not your mama. But I'm here," and from that moment on, he returned every day, bringing books and juice boxes and small plush toys with hand-stitched smiles, watching as her color returned and her silence faded, and slowly she began to speak, first just a word, then a sentence, then stories about a dog named Pickles and how she wanted to become a dancer and how her mama used to sing to her before bedtime, and Thomas, who once measured his worth by promotions and profit margins, now measured it by the brightness in her eyes, by the way she gripped his fingers when she slept, by how her laughter sounded like wind chimes on a quiet day. He learned that her mother had lost a job, then an apartment, then everything, and that Lila had trusted she'd return because that's what children do. They believe in promises even when the world forgets to keep them, and every time a social worker came by to say, "We'll find her a placement soon," Thomas's chest would tighten, and eventually, he found himself asking questions he never thought he'd ask. What if she stayed? What if I became her placement? What if this wasn't just charity but fate? And though his lawyer warned him it wouldn't be easy, though child services looked at him with skepticism at first, citing his demanding job and solitary life, Thomas fought harder than he'd ever fought for a contract, attending parenting classes, submitting to background checks, redesigning his apartment to include a pink-painted room with glow-in-the-dark stars and a nightlight shaped like a bunny, and most of all, he showed up every day. Every meal, every tantrum, every moment Lila needed him. He was there. When he officially became her foster guardian 3 months later, she leaped into his arms and whispered, "You came back," and it was then he realized she had never truly believed her mother would. She had been waiting not for someone familiar, but for someone to stay, and Thomas did. He stayed through scraped knees and bad dreams, through school drop-offs and forgotten lunchboxes, through ballet recitals and messy art projects, and somewhere along the way, the loneliness that had once wrapped around his life like a shroud lifted, replaced by the chaos and joy of parenting a child who had once belonged to no one, but now belonged completely. Years passed, seasons changed, and New York, ever relentless, continued to spin, but in their little apartment near the park, life was quieter, more intentional. Thomas began volunteering at shelters, funding school programs for homeless children, speaking publicly about invisible kids like Lila, and she, in turn, grew into a fierce, compassionate soul who never walked past a hungry stranger without stopping, who saved half her lunch every day, just in case someone else needs it, and who told her 5th-grade teacher during show and tell, "This is my dad. He's not my dad because he had to be, he's my dad because he chose to be," and Thomas, who once doubted his ability to love again, could only smile through tears, holding the handmade Father's Day card she gave him every year with a new drawing of the two of them on their pink bicycle rides through the city. On the night of her high school graduation, as flashbulbs popped and speeches were given, Lila, now 17 and radiant in her cap and gown, stood on stage as valedictorian, her voice trembling as she said, "There was a time I didn't know what a home was. A time I thought I'd always be invisible. But then a stranger picked me up off the street, carried me through the snow, and gave me not just a warm bed, but a place in his heart. He showed me that one act of kindness can change everything, that love isn't always born, sometimes it's built, day by day, through choice." And in the front row, Thomas wept openly, hand pressed over his mouth, clutching the tiny pink bicycle charm she had slipped into his pocket that morning, and when she ran into his arms afterward and whispered, "Thank you for saving me," he held her tightly and whispered back, "No, Lila. Thank you for saving me." And so, the story that began on a freezing sidewalk did not end there, nor did it end in the hospital, or in foster court, or even on that graduation stage. It continued through every sunrise breakfast, every bedtime story, every day that one man and one little girl chose to rewrite the meaning of family together, and in a world that too often looks away from suffering. This was a reminder that kindness is not weakness, that compassion is a revolution, and that sometimes, when the world rushes past a child in need, all it takes is one person to stop, to notice, to care, and by doing so, they don't just change one life, they change two.